So on chapter 7, we will get into taxes. This is one of the more longer chapters, I think, as far as PowerPoint slides go. But I think if you understand some of the concepts of elasticity that we've discussed before, this shouldn't be too terribly difficult, I hope. And there's some uh, general, I wouldn't say common sense, but some more theories about taxes that you may experience in your own life as well if you pay attention to income taxes and such. So let's first look at excise taxes, which is a tax on the sale of a good or service. Um, a good example of this is a hotel tax, service charge. When you get a hotel room, sometimes there is a $10 tax added on to it that the city puts on there. So these excise taxes will obviously raise the price that you pay as the buyer, but it also reduces the price that the sellers receive at the same time. This gives a wedge, drives a wedge between the two prices. So let's take a look at that. The supply and the demand here for hotel rooms in Potterville is this wonderful life, I think. So if you look at the equilibrium price here and quantity, the equilibrium price is $80, and at that price, 10,000 hotel rooms will be taken out. But if there is an excise tax imposed on hotel owners, you'll look here that all the supply curve shifts up by the amount of the tax. In this case, $40 per room. So at this point, point A, it looks like is the new equilibrium for the supply two, or the second supply curve, that is, and that's with the excise tax. As you can see, this point A is the half of quantity demanded for hotel rooms. And the reason this shifts up is because suppliers still want to get their same amount of money per hotel room, so they just add on, say, from point B, you add $40 and you get up to point A. So this obviously, people are going to pay more for these hotel rooms at any given quantity, and there's less of them. There's exactly half of them. There's 5,000 quantity demanded at this new equilibrium, and you can see with an excise tax imposed on the hotel guests, that would drive down the demand curve in this instance. People aren't going to want to demand as many hotel rooms if they have to pay $40. So there it is. The excise tax drives everything down. Equilibrium shifts to this point B. The incidence of the tax is a measure who really pays it. And this is sometimes a harder concept to learn, and that's the difference between who pays the tax and the burden of the tax is the incidence. This kind of refers to who bears the burden of the tax. In some situations, the sellers can pass the tax on to the buyers. In others, they cannot. So, for example, if the equilibrium price in one case rises from $2 to $2.15 after a tax increase of 20 cents, then the seller has to pay 5 cents of the tax, and 15 cents of that tax was paid by consumers. Now this really depends on elasticity, which we'll get into in a minute. So the wedge between the demand price and the supply price is the government's tax revenue. As you can see, is an excise tax here paid mainly by consumers. The this tax wedge, the consumers bear a lot more of the burden here, and that is because the price elasticity of demand is low. It is a relatively inelastic demand curve, which means a change in price is going to be a small change in quantity. But as you can see here with an elastic demand curve, the excise tax is going to be the burden is going to be bared a lot more on producers. So on for say in this example the book gives also, maybe the parking space downtown has this tax, but there are some other parking spaces within walking distance. So people don't need the parking spaces so much that they have to pay this $5 tax. So when the price elasticity of demand is high, and the price elasticity of supply is low, the burden falls mainly on producers, the tax incidence, that is. And again, elasticity plays a pretty big role, determines the incidence of the excise tax. So let's look here at the revenue, because why did things get taxed? To get revenue for the government to provide you with services. So let's look here with this excise tax of $40 per room and a quantity demanded of 5,000. So you just simply multiply your base times your height, and the base would be the quantity demanded here, as well, and the height would be the excise tax itself. So the area of the shaded rectangle, $40 per room times 5,000 rooms, is $200,000. So generally, this is really long. Basically, it's the height is that tax wedge, and the width is the quantity transaction under the tax. So the tax rate here is the amount of tax people are required to pay. And generally, when you increase the excise tax rate, you won't get the same amount of revenue in proportion, mainly because of there's the price effect and the quantity effect. The tax increase will reduce the quantity of goods and services transacted, so you'll get less quantity. So sometimes raising the tax rate may actually reduce the amount of revenue. You could see here's a good example between an excise tax of $20, you got that revenue there, and an excise tax of $60 per room. So a tax also reduces consumer and producer surplus, as you can see. Where is it graphically? Here we go. This actually shows it pretty well. So with your excise tax of T, this is T up here, your your consumer surplus will actually fall by this much, since these transactions, never mind with that part. So here's the fall in producer surplus. So why is these fall in consumer and producer surplus? Because these this money is going to the government. That's the revenue. Whereas these are transactions that they no longer take place because of the tax. So you can see here, this is the deadweight loss, which is caused by the tax. It's the total surplus lost to society because of the tax. These transactions do not take place anymore. So you can see here again, this is the deadweight loss in this triangle here. And that actually can be calculated too. If you take this, if you remember, a right triangle is 1/2 times base times height. So if you take this times that, so that height, and this width, and then half of that, and then double it, so you don't even have to half and double it because you have two of the sides, you'll get that deadweight loss and calculate that. So you'll see this deadweight loss triangle in further chapters, including monopolies, which we'll get to later in this semester. There's also administrative costs that are resources that the government uses to collect the tax. Taxpayers have to file it and pay it if it's an income tax. So there's not only the deadweight loss, there's the administrative costs. So taxes are pretty inefficient when you think about it. but they are necessary. And again, let's look at the deadweight loss and elasticities. You can see, much like the tax incidence, deadweight loss is larger when demand is elastic. Inelastic demand here, there's a little less deadweight loss. So you can think about something that doesn't change in quantity when the price increases. Maybe cigarettes is a good example. People, that's an addiction for many people. So when that's why it's such a popular tax, since it has so much of an inelastic demand. A change in price in cigarettes, if you're addicted to them, you're really going to keep buying them if you can afford it. So elastic supply, same incidence. Deadweight loss is larger when supply is elastic than compared to the inelastic supply right there. So to minimize the efficiency cost of taxation, governments try to tax only those goods for which demand or supply or both is relatively inelastic. And one example is of inelastic demand, again, is the cigarettes, for example. Behavior is relatively unresponsive to changes in price. So let's go on along to, two principles of tax fairness and efficiency. So we're getting into the benefits principle of tax fairness. Those who benefit from public spending should bear the burden of the tax that pays for the spending. A good example of this is the gasoline tax, where the money raised, the revenue raised from the gas tax gets used for road repairs, for example. And then there's the ability to pay principle of tax fairness. Those with the greater ability to pay a tax should pay more tax, and this is where we kind of get into progressive taxes. A lump sum tax is one that's the same for everyone, and that's an efficient tax, but it's not quite as fair. If you are charging $1 in tax for everyone on something, or let's say $100 or $1,000 in taxes per year on something, if your income is $2,000, that's half your income. If my income is $100,000, that's only 1% of my income. So though it's an efficient tax and easy to collect, it's not a fair tax, as you can see. So the fairest taxes in terms of ability to pay distort the incentives the most, and perform badly on efficiency grounds. So a progressive tax, for example, where you have to pay more as you earn more. So if your income's, say, $50,000, you only have to pay 15% of your income in taxes. If your income is $100,000, that gets raised to 30%. Well, you are, the ability to pay, you have more of an ability to pay, but it certainly isn't fair. And why would I want to earn more if I'm going to have to pay more? And that's where these incentives to make more are decreased when you have one of those tax systems. So there's a trade-off between equity and efficiency. So we can go through the U.S. taxes here. Tax base and tax structure, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. Proportional tax is also called the flat tax. It's kind of like the lump sum tax in a different way. And then and there goes through some of the different taxes. And again, these are self-explanatory, and you should be able to understand all of them. So let's go. So, okay, progressive tax. That's again what I explained before, and that takes a larger share of your income as of higher income taxpayers than low income taxpayers. A regressive tax takes a smaller share of income of higher income taxpayers than low income taxpayers. And you may think to yourself, why would any tax do that? I don't think it's. I think it's more inadvertently. Think of the maybe the tax on your driver's license, your fee on your driver's license. That's what, about $10? Well, that's more of a lower income taxpayer's income than it is high income. $10 to someone who makes $100 a week is a lot of money. $10 to someone who makes $10,000 a week is not a lot of money. So that's kind of like what a regressive tax is. And then a marginal tax rate is the percentage of increase in the income that is taxed away. So there's a mixture between the regressive and progressive taxes in the U.S. system. And a lot of that is because the state governments and local governments generally don't make a lot of effort for the ability to pay principal because there's competition between them. If I live in Indiana compared to Illinois, that's a big deal if I'm a business owner. That's why a lot of businesses are kind of flocking to Indiana, where there are lower taxes for your business. That's a perfect example of that. And I think that explains all of it. Again, this was a really long chapter, but hopefully not too difficult.